For years, John genuinely thought he had his money completely figured out. Back in 2021, he locked in a $350,000 mortgage at 3%. A 30-year fixed rate, frozen in time, at 3% flat. Picture John on the morning he finally made his very last mortgage payment. He poured a coffee, opened his laptop, and clicked the button with a huge grin. The balance hit zero, and he genuinely felt like the smartest man in America. Every voice he trusted had told him the exact same thing for years. Kill the mortgage, be debt-free, own your home outright, and finally sleep at night. So John did precisely what responsible, careful people are supposed to do. He threw an extra $600 at that mortgage every single month. It felt disciplined, it felt safe, it felt like real adulthood. And on paper, John looked like the perfect model of financial responsibility. But John made one very quiet, very expensive mistake along the way. He never actually sat down and ran the real numbers. Because that safe decision, the one everyone applauded, is costing him $284,000. Not $284 and not a typo either. That is $284,000 real dollars, simply gone forever. That is a paid-for house, and then a second house stacked on top of it. And the most unsettling part of the whole story is painfully simple. John still believes to this very day that he made the smart move. Let's be clear about something right away, before anyone gets the wrong idea. This is not a story about John being reckless or foolish with his money. John didn't gamble. John didn't overspend. John didn't break a single rule. He followed the most trusted advice in all of personal finance to the letter. And that, strangely enough, is exactly where the problem quietly begins. The advice to attack your mortgage was built for a completely different world. A world where mortgages routinely cost 8, 10, even 12% a year. In that old world, killing the loan early was obviously unquestionably brilliant. But John is not living in that world anymore. And neither are you. John is living in a world where he borrowed money at 3%. And when your mortgage only costs 3%, every inherited rule flips upside down. So here's the setup for the next half hour of your life. Two people, the same house, the same loan, the same rate, the same income. One of them pays the mortgage off early, aggressively, exactly like John did. The other one keeps the mortgage and does just one small thing differently. 30 years later, those two people are $284,000 apart. Same effort, same paycheck, same house, and one single decision between them. Before you dismiss this as some influencer saying debt is good, hear this out. Because the math does not care even a little about how the decision feels. And by the end, you will know exactly which side of that gap you're standing on. Let me properly introduce you to the two people at the center of this story. The first is John, 52 years old, steady job, careful with money his entire life. The second is Carla, a similar earner in the same city with the same hard-working mindset. Back in 2021, both of them bought nearly identical homes on quiet streets. Both locked in a $350,000 mortgage on the very same terms. Both received the same 30-year fixed rate, a beautiful 3.0%. Their monthly principal and interest came to $1,476, right down the line. They earned about the same paycheck and drove the same sensible, unremarkable cars. Neither one was chasing get-rich-quick schemes, meme stocks, or lottery tickets. The only real difference between them was one single belief about debt. And here's the detail that makes this a genuinely fair fight between them. Both John and Carla had an extra $600 a month to work with. Not a fortune, not lottery money, just $600 spare dollars every month. Roughly the cost of a couple of nice dinners out, nothing more dramatic than that. Now, John did not invent his plan out of thin air, to be fair to him. His father had drilled one single lesson into him for 40 straight years. A real man owns his home outright and owes nothing to any bank, ever. That advice was pure gold back in 1981, when mortgages cost 18%. John simply never stopped to ask whether it still held up at 3. This is the fork in the road, the exact place where their two lives split apart. John looked at his $600 and saw a weapon to destroy his debt. Every single month, he fired that money straight at the mortgage principal. His goal was simple, emotional, and deeply satisfying: burn the loan down fast. Carla looked at the exact same $600 and quietly asked a different question. She asked herself what that money was actually capable of doing somewhere else. So Carla kept paying her mortgage on the normal schedule, $1,476 every month. Then she put her $600 to work in a low-cost index fund. No day trading, no stock picking, no genius moves, and no crystal ball required. Just the boring, plain average market month after month for 30 straight years. Now let's keep this fair, because Carla is not getting a free lunch here. Carla is taking on more uncertainty than John, and we're going to be honest about that. John's return is locked and guaranteed, while Carla's return is neither of those things. But before you decide who is smarter, you need to see what happened to the money. Let me anchor you firmly in the real world these two people are living in. When they locked their loans in 2021, mortgage rates hit rock bottom, near 2.65%. By July of 2026, a brand new 30-year mortgage costs roughly 6.6%. That is no small shift. The price of borrowing more than doubled in 5 years. And roughly half of all American homeowners with a mortgage are sitting below 4%. About 12 million households are locked in below 3%, sitting right where John and Carla sit. If that describes you, this next part is the most important money math you'll see all year. Here's what nobody tells you about a 3% loan in a 6% world. That mortgage is not really a debt in the way your gut instinctively feels it is. It is a 30-year contract to borrow money at a price that no longer exists anywhere. Nobody on earth can get 3% money today, but John already has it, locked forever. There's a reason paying off a mortgage feels so urgent, and it's a trick of the schedule. In the early years of any mortgage, almost every dollar you pay is pure interest. On John's very first payment, $875 was interest alone. Only about $600 of that first payment actually touched the principal. When people see that breakdown, they panic and assume the bank is robbing them blind. So they rush to prepay, desperate to escape that terrifying interest column. But on a 3% loan, that scary interest is the cheapest money you will ever touch. You are panicking over a bill that inflation itself is quietly shrinking for you. The amortization schedule is designed to frighten you, and on a cheap loan, the fear is a lie. And here's the quiet magic almost everyone completely misses about a fixed-rate loan. Inflation itself is slowly paying down that mortgage for John year after year. He borrowed strong 2021 dollars and repays the loan with weaker, cheaper future dollars. Think about what $400 actually bought you back in 1995 versus today. John's mortgage payment is frozen at $1,476 for 30 entire years. In 20 years, that same $1,476 will honestly feel like pocket change. His income drifts up with inflation, while his monthly payment stays perfectly, permanently still. If inflation averages even 3%, his 3% loan costs him nothing in real terms. The bank that handed John 3% in 2021 now watches new borrowers pay 6.6%. John's lender would quietly love for him to pay that cheap loan off early. Hold on to that thought, because it tells you almost everything you need to know. Now let's actually run the numbers on John's aggressive payoff plan. John attacks the loan with his extra $600 every single month, relentlessly. He pays the entire mortgage off in about 18 years instead of the full 30. The total interest he handed the bank came to roughly $105,000. Now compare that to simply paying the normal schedule for the full 30 years. On the slow schedule, he would have paid about $181,000 in interest. So by paying early, John saved himself roughly $76,000 in interest. $76,000 is real money, and John is not crazy for wanting it. That is a genuine, legitimate win, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But hold that number in your mind, because it's about to get completely dwarfed. Once John's house is fully paid off around year 18, he stays perfectly disciplined. He invests the entire freed-up payment, about $2,076 a month from then on. He does exactly that for the remaining 12 years at a steady 7% return. By year 30, John's investment account holds about $447,000, plus a paid-off house, free and clear, with only his name on the deed. That is genuinely not a bad outcome, and John honestly feels like a big winner. Now let's see what Carla's very same $600 quietly did instead. Carla never rushed the mortgage. She invested $600 every month from year one. She did that consistently, without any drama, for all 30 years of the loan. And I'm not even going to use the stock market's historical average of about 10%. I'm going to use a deliberately conservative 7%, just to be fair to John. Here's the part of compounding that quietly fools almost everyone who tries it. For the first 10 years, Carla's account looks boring and barely ahead of John. Let me put real numbers on that slow, boring start so it feels concrete. At year 5, Carla has invested $36,000, and it's worth about $43,000. Barely ahead, and honestly, John's shrinking loan balance looks more impressive at that point. At year 10, she has put in $72,000 and holds about $104,000. It feels slow, unremarkable, and almost not worth all that patient discipline. But compounding does its real heavy work in the final decade, not the first. By year 20, that same quiet account has swelled to over $312,000. She never added a single extra dollar. The growth alone did all that heavy lifting. Between year 20 and year 30, her account roughly doubles yet again on its own. That is the exact stretch of years John spent proudly celebrating his paid-off house. The boring middle is simply the price of admission to the explosive end. At 7%, Carla's $600 a month grows into about $732,000. And she also owns a paid-off house because at year 30, her mortgage is simply finished. Same house as John, same starting loan, same $600, same 30 years of life. John's investment pile is about $447,000 at the very end. Carla's investment pile is about $732,000 at the same moment. The gap between them is $284,000, exactly the number from the title. That staggering gap is the true cost of what everyone kept calling the safe choice. And remember, the market's real long-run average is closer to 10%, not 7%. I lowballed it on purpose, and the gap was still $284,000. At the true historical average, that gap would be far more brutal than this. So why on earth did this happen to two nearly identical, equally hardworking people? Because John optimized the small number and completely ignored the enormous one. Here's the deeper reason the gap grows so violently over all that time. John's benefit, the saved interest, is basically a fixed one-time prize. Carla's benefit, the market growth, compounds on top of itself every single year. A fixed prize can never win a race against a compounding one given enough time. That is the quiet, unglamorous engine behind almost every fortune ever built. Time turns a small yearly edge into an absolutely enormous final gap. John had the same 30 years Carla did. He just aimed them at the wrong target. Saving 3% interest feels huge because the word interest sounds heavy and dangerous. But saving 3% while giving up 7% growth is a quietly losing trade. It is like sprinting to catch a bus while your own paid-off car drives away. Now, I can already hear the fair objection forming in your head right now. What if the market crashes at the exact moment Carla needs her money? It's a real risk, and pretending otherwise would be completely dishonest. But remember, Carla is investing every month for 30 straight years. She buys in when prices are high and when they are terrifyingly low. That steady monthly drip is the single best defense against any one bad year. And history is brutally clear about 30-year windows in a diversified fund. There has never been a 30-year stretch where that boring average lost money. John's guarantee protects him from a risk that 30 years quietly erases anyway. Here is the single sentence that reframes this entire debate in one clean line. Paying off a loan early earns you a guaranteed return equal to the loan's rate. On an 18% credit card, that guaranteed return is spectacular, so crush it. On a 3% mortgage, that guaranteed return is barely better than doing nothing. The exact same action is brilliant or foolish depending only on the rate. Most people never learn that the rate is the entire story here. But John gets a tax deduction on that mortgage interest, someone always shouts. Here is the reality that quietly demolishes that argument for almost everyone watching. In 2026, the standard deduction is $32,200 for a married couple. The overwhelming majority of homeowners take that standard deduction and never itemize at all, which means for most people, the mortgage interest deduction is worth exactly $0. The real reason to keep a 3% loan was never the little tax break. The real reason is the rate itself, and the growth that rate lets you quietly keep. There is a second cost to John's choice that never shows up on any spreadsheet. Every extra dollar John sent to that mortgage is now trapped inside his own walls. Home equity is the single hardest asset to reach at the exact moment you need it. Say John loses his job in year 10 with his house already 70% paid off. That impressive equity does absolutely nothing for him when the real bills start arriving. He cannot eat drywall, and the bank won't let him skip payments because he prepaid. To pull that money back out, he must sell the house or beg for a home equity line. And a bank only offers you a line of credit when you clearly don't need one. The very moment you actually need that money, the whole friendly offer disappears. Now remember Carla's investment account, the one that doubles as a real emergency fund. If her car dies or her roof leaks, she sells a small slice of it within days. John, staring at all that equity, reaches instead for a credit card at 24%. So the man who hated debt the most borrows at the worst possible rate in town. He turned cheap, patient 3% debt into expensive, panicked emergency debt. Money you cannot reach in an emergency is not really wealth. It is a monument. That is the cruel little irony hiding quietly inside the pay-it-all-off plan. And there is one more trap with prepaying that almost nobody ever thinks about. Once John pours that cash into the mortgage, he can never pull it back at 3%. The 3% loan he threw away is simply gone from the market forever. If he wants to borrow against his home again, he pays today's 6.6%. So he traded a permanent 3% advantage for a temporary good feeling. You can always choose to pay a loan off later, but you can never unpay one. Now ask the question the guru selling you peace of mind will never ask out loud. Who exactly profits when you rush to pay off a locked 3% loan? When John prepays, he hands his bank back money, it can instantly relend at 6.6. His lender was stuck earning a measly 3% in a 6.6% world. That is a quiet losing trade for the bank every single month for years on end. Your low-rate mortgage is actually a losing asset sitting on the bank's own books. In finance, that cheap loan is worth a little less to them every time rates climb. You are holding a genuine winning ticket and they would love for you to tear it up. And every early payment John makes secretly rescues the bank from its own bad deal. Read that one more time and really let it sink all the way in. The institution John is trying to beat is quietly rooting for him to pay early. When the people who profit from your loan want you to kill it fast, ask why. So let me make this $284,000 feel real for a second. That is roughly 7 years of a comfortable retirement, completely funded. It is a paid-for college education for 2 kids with money left over. It is the difference between leaving something behind and leaving nothing at all. John didn't lose it at a casino. He lost it feeling proud and responsible. That is exactly what makes this trap so quietly dangerous for genuinely good people. So let me make this deeply personal for just a second. Go pull up your own mortgage statement right now, or picture it clearly in your head. Find the interest rate, that one small, easily ignored number near the very top. If it starts with a 2 or a 3, you are holding John and Carla's exact choice. And notice, this whole gap came from a modest $600 a month. Double that to $1,200 a month, and the gap balloons past $440,000. The bigger your spare cash, the more brutal the cost of aiming it at a cheap loan. This is not a rounding error. For many families, it's an entire second retirement. Now, I'm not going to pretend the pay-it-off crowd is stupid because they are not. There is a deep, real human reason that paying off a house feels so incredible. Debt is a psychological weight, and owing nothing to anyone is a genuine kind of freedom. Most people honestly do sleep better knowing no bank holds a claim on their roof. There's also a hidden dopamine hit in watching that mortgage balance steadily drop. Every payment John made felt like a tiny, satisfying victory right there on the screen. Carla's account, by contrast, sometimes went down in a scary market month. Watching a number fall feels terrible, even when it's the smarter number to hold. So John chose the option that felt good over the option that was good. Our brains fear a falling balance far more than they love a rising one. And that peace of mind has real value. It just isn't worth the same to everyone. The mistake was never valuing safety, because safety is a perfectly reasonable thing to want. The real mistake is not knowing the actual price tag hanging on that safety. John did not knowingly choose peace of mind over $284,000. He chose it without ever once seeing that $284,000 price tag. A choice you make completely blind is not discipline. It's a guess wearing a nice suit. And here is the part of this whole story that should genuinely stop you cold. Up to now, I've compared John's mortgage to the stock market, which carries real risk. So let me take every last bit of that market risk completely off the table now. For most of 2023 and 2024, a federally insured savings account paid over 4.5%. A short-term treasury bill, backed by the full faith of the government, paid even a bit more. John's mortgage cost him 3%, while a boring insured account earned 4.5%. Meet Maya, who never trusted the volatile stock market for a single day of her life. Maya kept her spare cash in a plain high-yield savings account, fully insured and boring. In 2024, that dull little account quietly paid her 4.5%. She wasn't brave, she wasn't clever, she just refused to prepay a 3% loan. Maya's secret was not intelligence, it was simply refusing to touch a good thing. While everyone around her scrambled to kill cheap debt, she just calmly waited. And even Maya, the single most cautious saver alive, still quietly beat John's plan. So every dollar John rushed into that mortgage effectively earned him just 3%. That very same dollar sitting safely in Maya's insured account earned 4.5%. Paying off his 3% loan was a guaranteed loss of 1.5%. On every $100,000, that's $1,500 a year, handed back for nothing. $1,500 a year with zero risk, simply given away to feel responsible. Let that fully land because he didn't even need the stock market to come out ahead. The single safest thing he could possibly do with cash already beat the payoff, risk-free. And unlike the stock market, that insured savings rate required absolutely no courage at all. It sat right there, federally guaranteed, for anyone willing to simply not prepay. The guaranteed return that payoff fans love to brag about was guaranteed, all right. It was guaranteed to quietly lose him money every single year he kept doing it. Think for a moment about how strange and backwards that really is. The move sold to you as the safest choice on earth was quietly the losing one. Safe and smart felt like the very same word, but the numbers pulled them apart. A 3% mortgage in a 5% world is not a debt you rush to escape. It's a discount someone already handed you, and paying it off throws that discount straight away. Now let's keep this completely honest, because this exact advice is not for everyone. There are three kinds of people who should absolutely still pay their mortgage off early. First, if you're a few years from retirement and a paid-off house helps you sleep, do it. Meet Diana, who is just a few short years away from her own retirement. A mortgage payment in retirement genuinely terrifies Diana, and that fear is completely valid. Diana should pay her house off because her real math has to include her own nerves. Peace of mind is not free, but for Diana, it is absolutely worth the price. Second, if you honestly know you'll never actually invest the difference, then pay the house down. A guaranteed 3% will always beat money you were only going to waste anyway. None of this works if you're the kind of person who spends every spare dollar. Be brutally honest with yourself about that before you ever choose a side. The math quietly assumes discipline, and discipline is rarer than any interest rate. Third, and this is the big one, if your mortgage is today's 6.6%, everything flips. Paying extra on a 6.6% loan is a fantastic, guaranteed 6.6% return. If that is your rate, then attack that mortgage with everything you have all day long. And if your rate sits somewhere in the middle, around 5%, it's honestly a close call. At that point, splitting the difference between paying down and investing is a perfectly smart move. This was never some reckless message that debt is somehow secretly good for you. It was always know your rate and, just as importantly, know yourself. John's real tragedy was never that he chose to pay his house off early. His tragedy was that he never once ran the numbers before he did it. Somewhere out there is another version of John who ran those numbers first. That John kept his cheap loan, invested the difference, and retired with far more. The only thing separating the two Johns was a single afternoon with a calculator. The most important financial decision you can make is knowing which advice fits your situation, and knowing which advice was quietly written for somebody else's situation entirely. So do the math every single time before you follow the crowd off a cliff. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. If this showed you something you didn't know was happening with your money, subscribe to Desmond Wealth. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every single day. Because debt itself was never really the true enemy in this entire story. Not knowing the real price of your own decisions, that is the on.